My name is Jennifer Rightmyer, and I've been teaching sixth grade for 16 years. What I wanted to talk about was the misconceptions around our APPR, which is the plan that currently evaluates teachers. What I wanted to do for you was to talk about what we currently have and what the governor is proposing, just to try to make some sense of it and hopefully answer some questions that you may have about it. In 2012, the way teachers and principals were evaluated dramatically changed as APPR was instituted. APPR stands for Annual Professional Performance Review. The current evaluation system was hastily created due to the pressure from the governor, who insisted that students' scores be part of the APPR and that districts have a system in place by a steadily approaching date if they were to receive the race to the top funding, which we did. With that said, I'm going to explain our current evaluation system and what proposals are being made, as well as what proposals could mean for our kids here in Cooperstown. Currently, teachers receive a score out of 100 that is based on 4 main categories. The first 40% of our 100 comes from our district's administrators' evaluations. We get an announced observation and an unannounced observation each year. The governor is proposing that 15% come from our administrators and 35% come from someone outside the district. I'd like to remind you that when you send your children to us every day, you are entrusting them to someone who knows them, cares for them as individuals, and knows that they're an important human being in our Cooperstown community. Not someone who just sees them as children sitting at desks or numbers on a sheet of paper. Each child has an individualized way of learning, and the district educators here at Cooperstown are the ones that know what challenges each child does face. Not a complete stranger from state ed. I would like to point out that the state has not mentioned who will pay for these outside evaluators. I'm guessing you as the taxpayer. Our second category that we generates our 100 points is worth 20%, and it consists of a professional binder that exhibits a teacher's professional growth throughout the year, where they have individuality to decide with their administrator what will help to move them forward and grow as a professional. According to the governor, if he was to get his way, we would not have the opportunity to exhibit our professional growth in a binder or in any other way as part of our score. Currently, I'm a member of our district's APPR committee, where I sit alongside Mr. APPR, our 3 district administrators, teachers, and staff members from many levels, what I would call a collective representation of our district employees. This is certainly a positive that we can all come together and openly discuss what works, what doesn't work, where we should head, and what is best for us and, of course, our kids. On this committee, we are currently working towards a way to use combined scores to eliminate as much over-testing as possible, which is a goal of our district. We're also working on optional ways to generate professional growth points that would go towards our individual scores. This is a personal favorite, where we can set goals, push ourselves to grow in our professions, and make a positive difference in the school community. Teachers, along with their district administrator, can choose a path of growth most appropriate for each teacher. Well, the possible reality, the governor's proposal would not allow for this as an option in any way in our score. He is not proposing that professional growth be a factor. Can you imagine? I can. The final 2 categories total 40%, and they are comprised of data scores generated from the assessments. 20% is a growth score, and the growth score comes from state assessments like Regents exams or the 3 through 8 ELA or math tests, if a teacher has one. Otherwise, an SLO is created which require pre- and post-tests in each class. 20% comes from an achievement score. This is generated from the NWEA computer testing or another district-approved test. For some teachers, all 40 points comes just from NWEA. My point being here that there is just no consistency among grade levels or even subjects in a single grade level. The discrepancy is currently a concern that we have and are trying to address in our APPR committee work. But as a district, our hands are still tied. We can only do as much locally as at this point without a change at the governmental levels. The governor is recommending that 50% of the 100, instead of our 40 that has the gross score and achievement, will come from our state-generated tests. I feel that I need to speak to this to help all of you understand why we are so concerned by this 50% measure. First of all, in no way do we as educators feel that assessments are not necessary. We believe that they have a place in our classroom, and they are just one tool in driving our instruction as we implement Common Core standards. Our concern comes from the fact that the state tests are invalid measures, and let me tell you why. First of all, they are a snapshot in time, and they do not represent that whole child. We believe in a holistic approach to educating a child here at Cooperstown. Not just one way. Some children are not strong test takers. Actually, most are not. But they may excel on their homework, a project, a presentation, or just maybe through their classroom performance, but that would not be considered. We don't know what is on the test. We do not get to see what mistakes each child makes. We just get to see if they got the question wrong or right, and we only get to see that after we no longer have those students. The assessments are also graded by other districts. Teachers that do not understand the material and may not even be comfortable grading a test in a subject area out of their certification or expertise. I've sat alongside some of these people. Our students know that all of these tests do not count in their averages, and often this knowledge is reflected in the effort they put forth, unfortunately. We as a district have recognized that assessments have a place, but 50% is not something we support. In closing, I would like to say to all of you, and of course to our elected officials, that every minute a child is taking a test is a minute they are not learning something new. To me, as a mother of 3 and an educator, this is a loss of a teachable minute. Thank you.
My name is Sandra Bliss. I am a 1965 graduate of the Cooperstown Central Schools and a graduate of SUNY Oneonta for my bachelor's and SUNY Cortland for my master's degree. I taught for 40 years mathematics in the Frankfurt Schuyler school system and retired back to Cooperstown. I have been a leader in the teachers union movement in New York State for 46 years. I currently serve as the co-president of NYSET's Retiree Council 12, which represents over 4,600 retirees in 7 counties, which includes Cooperstown. And so I was invited to participate in this participation. I'm covering charter schools, and I'm going to go over the history of charter schools because many people do not really realize what charter schools are all about. The first idea of charter schools came about in the 1970s. It was further developed in the late 1980s, and in the early 1990s, Minnesota was the first state to start charter schools in Minneapolis. The original idea was a charter school would be a public school led by teachers, and it would be a laboratory to improve the public schools. In other words, they would be freed of what some people consider were constrictions on schools, whether it be union contracts, whether it be state regulations, or other things, that they would have more freedom, and the individual school district would decide what those freedoms would be, and then they would be a laboratory to try to come up with ways to improve the schools. The reality is that is not what has happened. In New York State in 1998, in December, the charter school legislation was passed in New York State. It was in a special session in December the end of the year, and it was a agreement that was made in order for the legislators to receive a pay increase. They were forced to approve charter schools. There have been some amendments to the law since then, but the reality is that it is privatizing our public school system. It is a loss of local control, and in the charter schools, they basically cherry pick the students. In other words, they get to pick who comes to the school, rather than in the public schools that we all work in or send our kids to. Everyone is welcome and everyone receives an education. Now, you will sometimes see the charter schools, especially Eva Moskowitz schools in New York City, and I have some handouts for the board of recent articles, claim that they are helping the low-income students in poverty, which we know that is really the problem in what are called failing schools. CJ last year said that in the Cooperstown School District, when they drove down through all the data, basically the kids who were struggling were the kids that were living in poverty, the low socioeconomic. And that's because those kids don't have some of the things that other kids that have a higher socioeconomic status in their family have. And they come to school with deficits that the schools need to provide them additional resources for. So it comes back to the funding picture, that the inequality in the schools is preventing many of our children from being able to perform to the ability that they could if they had the resources that they need. So in the charter schools, they do not service special ed kids. They do not service a comparable number of students with free or reduced lunch, which is one indication of children that are often in need of special services, not always, but often. And they have basically become a backdoor voucher system. And people advocating school choice paid with public taxpayer dollars. And what's happening right now is profiteers are trying, the hedge fund billionaires are trying to take the taxpayer money and make a huge profit off of it. Recently there was a conference in New York City where they talked about how to invest in charter schools to make money. There is a federal tax credit of as high as 39% for people that invest in charter schools. The other thing that happens often in charter schools is they start gentrifying a community. So they will go into a low-income area of a community, build with donations from these hedge fund billionaires a beautiful-looking school facility that is much better, has all kinds of technology, and then once that happens, they start gentrifying the whole community, and the poor people that live in that community are kicked out of the community as it becomes gentrified. So what they're really interested in is dismantling public education. Major concerns, I mentioned the chronic underfunding of the New York schools. Many people are not aware that it's taxpayers' dollars, and it's taxpayer dollars that come from your school district. For example, if there was a charter school in Cooperstown, this year, $12,167 per student would have to be given to that charter school. And at a certain point in time in the fall, the charter schools announce to the state what their, certify to the state what their enrollment is, and then they receive that money. The school district has to upfront the money. They do not get the money from the state that they give to the charter school until the following year. And what happens is, after that date that they have to certify to the state, they start expelling students. And the school district does not get the money back when the child comes back to the school district. They expel students for behavior issues that we can't do. They expel students because of low grades. And often what you find if you look at the number of students that are In a charter school, it starts at a high number in the low grades, and as they start getting to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, the population declines, and it's only the students that are receiving good scores on the state exams that remain. We can't do that. In Utica, which has a charter school, they have to pay $9,280. In Whitesboro, whose district sends 4 students to the Utica charter school, the Whitesboro School District this year has to pay that $10,136 per student to the Utica school. And the West Frankfort Elementary School, the district I taught in, is in the process of being sold to the Utica charter school. So any Frankfort students that end up going to that school, if it was this year, that school district would be paying $9,775. In Albany, which there are a huge number of charter schools, and it's really hurting the city school system, they pay $14,072 per. And the charter schools get a 5-year lease from, or a charter from the state, and are reviewed every 5 years. The Brighter Choice schools in Albany were told that they would not get their charter renewed, and now apparently they're going to get one for 3 years. There's a lack of accountability and transparency. They receive taxpayer dollars, but they do not have to report on what they're doing with those dollars. Comptroller DeNapolier has done audits on these schools, and Eva Moskowitz, who's head of the charter school in New York, in the one section of New York City, the Success Schools, who makes a receives a salary of over $500,000 with the taxpayer money and the additional donations. She says it all comes from the donations. Filed a court suit and won so that they could not be audited. The state legislature passed a new law. They filed a court case, won, and so the legislature has now passed the second law, and the comptroller is auditing, and that was the basis of removing the charter from the Brighter schools in Albany. The governance is not democratically elected like a school board. It is whoever they decide to be part of the governance structure of their board, or whatever kind of governance structure they're going to have. There's a lot of fraud. Many charter schools all over the country have been found to not wisely use the taxpayer monies that they have been given. And there's basically no difference in performance. Stanford has done a study which a few of the schools are getting reading scores higher than the public schools where they are. Most of them are getting the same scores, and a large, about a third, are receiving lower scores than in the public schools in their community. And then there's the stability. As children bounce back and forth, there's a charter school closed down, they come back to the school district. 30 of the teachers in the charter school in Utica left the school last year, and the teacher who is now teaching in Waterville said that basically they spend all their time on math and ELA, because that's what the test is, a little on science. And high school students in Utica have told me that when their younger brothers and sisters have been there, or their friends' younger brothers and sisters come back to the Utica school district, they are way behind the other students. I told you about Oneida and Herkimer County, so you know they can be here. And they have tried virtual schools in some parts of the country, where the students are either in a school on computers all day long, or are in their homes on computers all day long. The ones that have been tried have failed, and that's kindergartners, first graders, second graders on computers all day. I talked about Buffalo. I didn't get the statistics for Buffalo and New York City. And that's the end of my part of the presentation.
Hello, my name is Michealle Cole. I currently teach second grade, but I have taught in the Cooperstown district for 24 years. And I'm going to speak to you a little bit on receivership. First off, to know what receivership is It's when schools deemed to be failing, receivership allows outside organizations to take over the schools or the entire district, like a charter school or just privatizing it. It doesn't have to be a charter school. Receivership would affect all aspects of our school. The State Department would have the ability to appoint a receivership. It wouldn't be something that is selected by the community, the administration, the board, or the superintendent. It would be selected by the State Ed Department. Under receivership, the Commissioner of Education appoints a receiver who is vested with the powers of the school district superintendent and the school board. In addition to consolidated governing authority, the receiver also has the power to amend or suspend aspects of collective bargaining agreements in the district, such as the teachers' union contracts, the service unit contracts, and administrator contracts. The school board loses its powers and becomes advisory only. They would be there, but they wouldn't have control over what's happening. Just because they give their advice doesn't mean that the receiver would have to take their advice. The superintendent is no longer employed by the district, and a state administrator is signed and assumes, a state administrator assumes the powers of the board and the superintendent. So it's quite an incredible thing. Receivership will oversee possible privatization of our public schools. A state will have the power to appoint individuals or organizations like nonprofits and charter schools to take charge of overseeing and overhauling failing school districts. Right now, in the governor's proposal, he's allowed $8 million to support the efforts of appointing receivers should they need to be appointed. In our state right now, there are 178 failing schools. 77 of them have been failing for 10 years. I was shocked when I read that statistic, because why haven't they done something before now for those 77 schools whose children have been in a failing school all of those years? 10 years. A receiver would have the ability to override and negate collective bargaining agreements with the I already said that, sorry. The receiver would supersede any decision of the superintendent and the Board of Education to have power to, first off, restructure the entire school in whatever way they seem to deem fit. They could overhaul the entire curriculum. So we've already gone to the standards and the Common Core. They could take that all away and do what they wanted to do. Improve professional development and replace teachers and administrators at their will. So if this should be, if our school were to be taken over by a receivership, any one of our teachers, administrators, superintendent could be just let go. There's no tenure, there's nothing, there's no support for any teacher or administrator. And lastly, a receiver would have the right, or would remove all seniority rights. So I said I've been teaching for 24 years. We'd all be teaching our first year. So there would be no seniority. They would have the authority to do whatever they deemed fit for administration, faculty, and service people. I think I have one more slide. Yes, okay. The receivership would eradicate local control, take it away from the district, including control of the Board of Education and administrators, and put it in the hands of nonprofit and charter schools. It would take all of any control that parents have, any involvement that you have would be controlled by the receiver. We would have no control at all. It would just be put into a nonprofit or a charter school. And that's what a receivership is.
Again, I just wanted to thank the board for allowing us to present some information tonight on the governor's proposal. And thank you, CJ, for helping us out as well with the gap elimination.
everybody for their commitment to these presentations, educating the public about the complexities of how we go about educating the children in this district is, I think, very helpful. To me, the biggest important message is to the public is to be active, to understand that the state standards are driving a lot of pressure into the districts, and it raises the stress level for everyone, and ultimately that impacts the education of your own children. So take to heart what you've heard, and consider it carefully. Use it.
What we heard early from Ann and CJ was a summary of how the school and the faculty has adapted to the regulations, and you heard the results of that to some degree with Jen and Kristen in terms of the types of things that are going on for the teachers to work on behalf of the better goals of the Common Core and testing. What struck me particularly about Kristen and Jen was that two passions were heard there. One was their genuine passion for children and their education, their profession, and the other passion was for how resentful the teaching institution will be or is toward what's attempting to be done with those, with the teaching profession, and those two passions are just clashing. They either go opposite directions or they go at each other, and I see them going at each other and just clashing, and the effect really is in the focus, the concentration, the spirit, etc. that teachers have. And I think it's very well said, everything you heard, and it moves me, and I'm sure it moves all of you out there.
I have one question for Michealle. When you were mentioning receivership, I realize we don't have any of the governor's failing schools in our county. However, we have a number of schools in financial distress, severe financial distress. And I was wondering if you had read or heard anything about the possibility of receivership under those conditions.
A school has to be it has to be a failing school for a certain period of time before it would go into receivership. And most of the 77 schools that are failing and have been for 10 years are in the Buffalo area. But the concern is, even with charter schools taking over so much of education, if a parent decided to apply at a charter school in Utica, our district would still have to pay that money. So it's not that our school is failing, but it's a big concern for any schools around us that are failing, or charter schools that are out there trying to pull people in.
And the school district also has to pay the transportation, the 15 miles, has to pay the textbooks, the hardware, software, library that they do now for a private school if the student goes to a charter school. So he would have to transport 15 miles, and the school is farther than overseas. They have to figure out a way to go the additional mileage.
Thanks very much. Very well done. Moving on to the agenda. Are there any public comments on agenda